and welcome to this week's Politics Today. And in this programme, we'll be discussing the government's announcement to scrap the BBC licence fee, but also to freeze the licence fee for 2 years. We're asking, what does this mean for the BBC, and what will this mean for the British broadcasting landscape? So to join me in this programme, I'm joined by Robin Benson, who's a Christian commentator. Good to see you, Robin. And Alistair Scott, who's the UK Director of Joseph Storehouse. I'll start off with you, Robin. What do you make of this government announcement by the Culture Secretary Nadine Dorries that she plans to freeze the BBC licence fee that's been in place for 100 years, which is effectively a teletax, at £159 per year for the next 2 years. And then when the Royal Charter runs out in December 2027, she's looking to completely get rid of the BBC licence fee.
I think, Simon, that there'll be those who heard this announcement when it came out this past weekend who will be saying long overdue. And it probably is. I mean, as you say, the licence fee has been in place for decades. And it was set up at a time when the BBC was the only media source outside of newspapers and magazines in the UK. Well, the whole landscape has changed dramatically and is constantly changing. So the need to reassess how the BBC is paid for is long overdue. I mean, I have to say, we were talking before we came on air. There is also this slight sly sense that with the problems that the Prime Minister has at the present time, that this may have been put out as a slight distraction to take media attention away from the things that he's battling with. But having set that aspect aside, which we're not going to talk about, I know that today, it's long overdue. Yeah. And I know it's going to cause problems for the BBC. No corporation of the size of the BBC is going to to find it easy to adjust to something which is, in some senses, a revolutionary, radical change. But I think many people, outside of even media circles, would agree this whole thing needs looking at very seriously, and the BBC needs to stop and take stock and see what is its purpose. Because that's, we need to look at the whole idea of why was the BBC founded? Is it fulfilling its purpose? If it's not, then this is one way of maybe pressurizing it. And it's a very intransigent organisation. It will not move. So if this forces it to do a major reassessment of what it exists for, then I'm all for it.
Absolutely. And Alistair, according to The Spectator, that the BBC's income for the financial year of 2019 to 2020, the BBC generated a total income, this is staggering, of 4.94 billion, of which 3.52 billion was publicly funded from the licence fee. Now, it's kind of seems like a 100-year financial model, essentially a television tax that's so outdated that if you own a television set, then you have to pay the licence fee. The BBC is now complaining that they'll have a 285 million shortfall with this freezing of the licence fee at £159 per household. What do you think of the BBC?
Well, I think obviously it's going to be so challenging for them because they've got used to a system that funds them, and but the world has changed. The whole media has changed, and we really have to come into the new world of competition. And I think all of us are very aware when you just see some of the personalities that are on the BBC now and the high salaries they receive, and they're astronomical, really, because it's become more of an entertainment. It's competing with an entertainment world, but really, like Robin said, the whole BBC was set up to be informative. It was set up to be a truth-telling organisation. Integrity was its foundation. Really, was really founded on biblical principles in its very start. And you see how it's moved from that. I mean, I was thinking when I was driving up here, sort of a couple of words came into my mind. in the past it would be a newsbreaker, but in the last few years it tries to be a newsmaker. So it starts to exaggerate, maybe tells things with an opinion rather than report the truth. And we need to get back to all our media and our, particularly the BBC, being a truth-telling organisation.
Absolutely. Oh, and Robin, what do you make of Nadine Dorris's tweet, which I'm going to read out to you now? Firstly, she says that the BBC by 2028 needs funding would be required, and this is what she tweeted. She said, "The days of the elderly being threatened with prison sentences and bailiffs knocking on the door are over." So she clearly has an ideological axe to grind at the BBC. Do you think that a lot of this motivation has been decades and decades of left-wing media bias on behalf of the corporation, particularly as news coverage, whether it's Israel, whether it's Brexit, whether it's Christians, and a promotion of kind of extreme kind of liberal values, has actually led the BBC to this place, because you can say that it no longer speaks for the vast majority of the British public.
And I think that's a fair comment. For those of us who do, whatever we watch, take in from the BBC, have been increasingly dismayed at the leftward, woke, politically correct, I mean, whatever modern terminology you want to apply to it, direction that it's gone in over the last, 2 decades in particular. And as Alistair pointed out, the BBC, certainly in its news broadcasting services, has ceased to be a reporter. It has become a commentator, allowing its reporters to put their viewpoint forward in what they're reporting, instead of just reporting the facts. So, and of course, when you've got a Conservative government in place, as we have, who perceive that the corporation has been more pro-Labour or more left-wing in its outlook, you're going to have an obvious clash between the sitting government and the nation's public broadcaster. And we forget that actually the BBC is held in high esteem, I would say, worldwide. So what the BBC reports, other major news networks, take this as, pardon the expression, gospel. This is the truth. Even though they've been proven over and over again to not necessarily tell the truth. I mean, we have this, this recent incident of the young Jewish people at Hanukkah in London, and the BBC's total, fabrication of certain aspects of that report, which they still have not acknowledged, even though anybody with half a brain listening to the video feed knows that there were no Islamic slurs uttered by those young people who were being attacked verbally and threatened by this mob outside the bus. And the BBC has dug in and just refuses to acknowledge that whatever editorial team was involved in that one made a complete hash-up of it and actually portrayed the Jewish community in London as being an anti-Islamic. And all, everything that goes with that, all the overtones that go with that. And this is just one, in some senses it's a minor thing, but it's one factor in the way that the BBC has shifted in the way that it reports news. And I'm not surprised in some senses that, Nadine Dorris has got quite a reputation of being a strong Conservative Party MP, and she's got very fixed views on things. And I'm not surprised that being given this portfolio, that she's decided to take the BBC head on and challenge them with this. And I say, all power to her elbow.
No, absolutely. Now, this is interesting statistics, Alistair. So the number of people paying the BBC licence fee has declined, and by March 2021, there were 24.8 million Brits coughing up the licence fee, and that is down from the previous year of 25.5 million. So if we look at that number of people choosing not to watch television and choosing to watch online platforms, whether it's YouTube or Netflix or anything else, is an indication that already the licence fee is out of date anyway. And maybe the government is actually doing the BBC a big favour because sooner or later, with the younger generation coming up that watch YouTube and they watch Netflix and no longer watching the BBC or getting the news content or knowledge from the BBC, then the future of the BBC is pretty much at stake anyway. Give it another 10, 20 years.
Yeah, and I think this is it. It's like forcing them to have a rethink. It's funny, I was just reminding myself, it was back in the early 90s, I was ministering in Albania. And, you know, I was taken to meet some elderly people and how they were talking about the BBC being their life stay. You know, they used to smuggle in radios and when they were under this amazing communist bloc where everything was scrutinized and controlled. And this old lady said to me, I used to listen to the BBC news reports and it was the only thing that told me the truth of what was happening in the world, because everything around the government there was just telling them what they wanted them to hear. And I thought, you know, that's only 30 years ago, you know, just under 30 years when I was there. And I was thinking then, aren't I so pleased that we do have the BBC and it's stuck to those foundations. But as we just talked about, the last 25 years or so, the slant has changed dramatically. And as you say, you know, just look at the statistics. Less people are watching BBC. A lot of people I talk to, they say, well, we don't watch BBC, so why should we be paying £159 per year for a fee? You know, we're paying a lot more for Sky or whatever other media they're using. So I think, you know, like everybody else, my prayer is come back to what you were there for. I mean, we mustn't forget it's not just TV, because BBC, a larger part of it is the radio. And when I was talking to this lady, she was talking about the radio. Yeah. So it's a vast organisation, and it's time to look at itself, like Robin's just said, and look at ways that they can be competitive in the real world, because things are changing, and they're changing rapidly because technology is changing rapidly.
And it's also the fact that yes, you've got that major drop in licence payers, but it's the older generation who are still paying this licence fee, who are being the ones who are most penalised after the government withdrew the support for free licences for those who are over 75, you know, forcing them to have to re-budget. And again, today, figures coming out, inflation is skyrocketing. These are the people who are going to be squeezed financially, you know, in the coming months, the coming year, as food prices, you know, we've seen the reports of, you know, energy, electricity, gas prices going up. So it's a good thing that the licence fee has been frozen for a couple of years, but it's still those who are actually paying it who are being penalised the most. As you say, young people couldn't care less about the BBC. Yeah. You know, they're getting their news sources from all sorts of other media. So, as Alistair has pointed out, the BBC is the fact that they're going to be forced, it looks like, to do a complete reassessment is an absolute necessity.
And Alistair, for example, if we look at some of the top earners of working for the BBC, Gary Lineker is on 1.36 million, Zoe Ball 1.13 million, Hugh Edwards for reading the news gets £425,000 a year, and Fiona Bruce, who does Question Time as well as the Antiques Roadshow, is on £405,000 a year. I mean, these are, I know that the BBC have cut the funding of so many of their top presenters massively over the last few years, but still, that is still an awful lot of money to pay one presenter that is actually coming from our own taxes. So we own a TV, we have to pay the license fee. These are the salaries that they get, and surely they can get other people that are actually better than them for a less price.
Yeah, of course they're looking at names that are famous in the eyes of the general public, and therefore to get these people they're paying the sort of salaries that they would possibly get if they were on any of the other media channels. But you know, are they any better than if they were doing what they're meant to do, which is just report? I mean, you know, we're talking about Gary Lineker there. I'm pretty certain he was earning a lot more than that before, and then there was a major cut which he's taken in order to just stay with the programs he's doing, and he's a popular character. But is he any different to somebody else you could put into that position to report a football match or a series of football matches or whatever, who would be more than willing to do it for much less of a cost. So yeah, it has to change. The time has come where, you don't just bring in celebrities because you think that'll boost your viewers. Get the programs right and your viewers will stay. Get the programs wrong and then you need celebrities to attract them. And just talking about the timing of this report coming through, I mean, as we've talked about the pensioners who are the main ones who still watch BBC and pay for the fee, they are the mainstay support also for the parties, for the Conservative Party. So the way that came through as the poor old pensioners who have been threatened with prison, it's aimed to gain support and deflect a little bit from what else is going on in the government at this time. So.
And Robin, do you think that Nadine Dorris's controversial announcement, because it's caused a rift in the cabinet? Rishi Sunak, the Chancellor, wasn't told until Saturday that the announcement would be made on Monday, so hasn't given the cabinet time to think through the proposal of freezing the licence fee and then altogether scrapping the licence fee come December of 2027. So the big question is, do you think with this pressure now placed on the BBC directors, because they're saying they're going to have to make cuts of £280 million because of inflation. That means a lot of programmes will be cut, that means a lot of jobs going, but essentially also means is that, do you think this will change the political editorial line of the BBC? So they'll be a bit more kind of balanced on some of these issues?
Wow, that's a big question, Simon. That's a big question. I mean,
because
the BBC, I mean, the BBC is a monolith. It's enormous. You've got, the major centre in London next door to All Souls. You've now got this vast media city enterprise up in Manchester. And it seems to me that the major broadcasting flits back and forward between those two major points. It is going to take something major to shift the BBC away from the direction it's heading in. And the fact that it's a Conservative government that is seen to be, inverted commas, attacking the BBC, I think will only entrench some of those who are anti-conservative or anti-right-wing, anti-Christian, whatever label you want to stick on it, in their position, and try and keep the BBC in the way that it's going. And any major organisation that is threatened with its budget is going to put out all sorts of dire consequences. Radio 4 is going to go, BBC 3, BBC 4. The Director General is already threatening to cut this, that and the other thing. Personally, I think that's just a negotiating ploy. He's throwing out these threats. Whether it actually happens or not, time will tell. But like any other organisation that is operating under stringent financial circumstances, the BBC is going to have to take some more cuts. Yeah.
And Alistair, I mean, whenever for example, the BBC's banned from Israel, so you can't watch it in Israel. You can watch Sky, but you can't watch the BBC. But whenever you're kind of abroad and you're in a hotel and the BBC News is on, they never tell you what's happening in Britain. It's always kind of a globalist news agenda that they take in. So, sometimes when you're away from home, you want to know what's happening politically. Well, I certainly do. Being a journalist, I need to keep up. So when I come back, I'm fully aware of some things happening. But I never see really the BBC report any kind of news stories of what's happening in Britain. It's major global news stories that fit a globalist agenda. And also, do you think that is also one of the reasons why the BBC is also having problems? Because it is a global corporation with a global news outlet. And yet it doesn't really reflect what's really happening in Britain. And the more important news stories are not actually on news, and you have to find them.
That's right. I mean, that's also a major shift of it's almost hard to work out when it started to happen because, in the past, the BBC News, yes, it would give you the kind of world stories that were going on, but it would focusing on what's going on in the country, in the government, major events that are happening. But there certainly has been a shift in that direction, talking more on a world basis than a home base. And it makes you think, why has that influence come in? Is it something to do with the whole globalism criteria that's come in? And I would say yes, probably is. And certainly the way things are reported, as Robin said earlier, they become more of a commentator than a news provider. And that too is not, I think generally is not popular by people who really want to know. We can make up our own opinions. We don't need to hear what Mr. So-and-so thinks on the news program, and it comes out every half hour on the radio and every 3-4 times a day on the TV programs. And it certainly does sway. It sways the way people think, rather than let's assess it, let's have a look further into it. So I think it really is time for there to be a major turning around in the way things are reported, and let's get back to reporting our own news.
Absolutely.
As well.
And we also see with the BBC, their news agenda takes on obsessions, which we probably and having met with BBC journalists and been into the BBC, when it comes to Israel, I kind of recognise there's a kind of institutionalised bias against Israel. But if we, for example, take President Trump, now I think if you watch the BBC when he was in power, there was a news report every single day condemning him. Now, when you look at the facts, we have a senile old president in Joe Biden that can't even string a sentence together, and yet there's not the same analysis of his presidency of how he's damaging the world and making the world a more dangerous place, and they choose to ignore that. And they choose to focus on some stories and then not focus on others. And of course we've seen the likes of Jeremy Bowen and the likes of Uri Gurin reporting on Israel, reporting from their own bias. I mean, Uri Gurin a couple of years ago did a report on International Holocaust Memorial Day. She visited Yad Vashem and she talked about how the IDF are attacking, abusing Palestinians, which had nothing to do with the Holocaust or that item.
Yeah, I mean, and that's why you and I know that many pro-Israel supporters, certainly amongst the Christian community, are absolutely, totally fed up with the BBC, and many of them just don't watch it anymore. I mean, I had a text from someone last night who said, I don't, because something came up in a discussion, I don't know what you're talking about because I don't watch the BBC News. So I had to find a link from somewhere else and send it to that person. Yeah. And of course, you've got the whole issue again of the Balin report, which has been shoved away in a safe somewhere. And the BBC spent £200,000 of licence pay money to prevent the publication of a report. They're preventing a report that was looking into the BBC's attitude towards Israel and the Jewish people. Well, if you're preventing it being published, the logical conclusion is that it came to the conclusion that the BBC is anti-Israel and anti-Jewish. If it's not, what's the problem? And why did you spend £200,000 in legal fees to prevent it being published? You know, the BBC wastes so much money on, in situations like this, and it doesn't do itself any favours certainly with the Christian community in the way that it tends to report Christian-related events, and particularly for us, with the interest that we have in Israel and the Jewish people, I don't believe anything the BBC says about Israel and the Jewish people. If I even bother watching it, I don't believe it. And I'll go and find another news source that I think is more even-handed in the way that it approaches to actually find out the facts.
And talking about new news sources, do you think that the new channel that's been launched on Freeview, GB News, that gives the news from a bit more of a conservative perspective, it is also kind of damaging the kind of BBC, because now there is an alternative news source other than the BBC or Sky and ITN that all have a kind of left-wing bias. And that's the sad thing about broadcasters and broadcast journalists on the mainstream media, is that they have left-wing media bias. So the whole perspective is one of a left-wing agenda, and that's how they see the world, and that's how they promote the world. So the fact is that there is a new news channel, and Dan Wootton's is doing a great job on that platform. It means that there is an alternative and competition when it comes to news.
Exactly, we need that for sure. But you can see the pressure that GB News is being put under by the major media service, and if anyone's trying to drive it out of existence, it's the way it's being reported, and it's true. Like you talked about, reporting on Trump. He was always reported as if he was some kind of idiot, and yet he kept the USA as a strong force. Now, as you say, we got a President Biden who doesn't seem to know what's going on, and yet he's kind of almost revered as some kind of hero figure, as it was with Barack Obama before. The coming Messiah he was spoken about from the BBC. But this is it. I think, without a doubt, most media companies, including the BBC, they want to sensationalize news. They don't want to just report news, day-to-day news. And we want to hear the day-to-day news. We don't want to hear your sensationalizing about a packet of crisps or whatever it is. We want to know what's really going on, and so we can make good judgments for ourselves.
Absolutely. So with about 2.5 minutes of the programme left, Robin, if Nadine Dorris's BBC proposal of scrapping the licence fee comes to fruition in 2027, the end of 27 into 28, do you think the BBC as a corporation can actually survive?
Oh, it will. It will, because it is a national institution. So whatever government, and who's to know which government will be in power by that point.
Exactly.
Whichever government is in power at that point will not allow the BBC to fall apart. There will be either some compromise or some cobbled together some new system of funding. The BBC's not going to disappear anytime soon. All we can hope and pray is that there is a shift away from this left-leaning perspective into at least something that's more central. At least give those who have a conservative and more right-wing, inverted commas, viewpoint a voice, so that at least there's some sort of balance portrayed in the way that the BBC behaves.
Absolutely. And within 30 seconds, we demand a lot of our broadcasters, don't we? Particularly when it comes to news, that they present the news in a truthful manner, in a non-biased manner, and that their viewers can make up their own mind about key events and political news stories that are breaking.
Yes, absolutely. And I mean, us as believers really need to do what we're doing anyway, but maybe multiply it, praying for the integrity to return, not just for the BBC, but for every organisation that's got the attention of the general public. We really need to believe for truth, integrity.
So Alistair and Robin, thank you so much for being my guests on this week's Politics Today, and I want to thank you for watching this programme. What we see really is that the BBC is a huge institution that is being challenged by the licence fee being frozen and potentially abandoned in the year 2028. So let's continue to pray for truth on our airwaves. And so thank you for watching Politics Today.